Yay. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Pleasance. It's good
Um,
to see you.
it's amazing to be with you, although I wish it was in real life, which is my preferred method of being with amazing women and humans, but hopefully again soon. But we know each other from the kids yoga world
Mhm.
and from the kids yoga conference, which was 5 years
Oh my
old
gosh.
this past year. So we've known each other for that longer than that now. And one of the reasons that I asked you to come on and have this conversation is you are an expert in
Mhm.
anxiety and in mindfulness for kids and families. And I don't actually know. You're not a therapist, are you? Are you a
No,
therapist?
no, I'm
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
No, most of my experience with therapy is being in it.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
No, but
I just didn't
joking
think so.
aside, I work with a lot of therapists and I teach continuing education courses
Yeah.
for therapists. So I've learned a lot in that sort of
Yeah.
work.
But I like to have these different lenses and these different views because where we come from philosophically
Hmm.
really does make a difference. And then how we're seeing what's happening with this. Some people will say disease, some people will say disorder, some people will say superpower. Kind of
Hmm.
depends on where you're coming from. So give us a little bit of your background and history professionally and how you came to this work and this current online class that you're running.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my background is in education. My master's degree is in education. I thought I was going to make a life working in education.
I mean, same,
And
same.
like many people, and I sort of have, but I took a detour about 14 years ago. I was teaching, I was actually working in the children's program of a domestic violence shelter. That was before I finished my master's and before I started working in schools. And that was the beginning of practicing and teaching yoga and mindfulness with kids for me. So at the time, I was living in a pretty isolated small town out west. I was really far away from friends and family. My personal practice was kind of at um, the height of where it needed to be for me to kind of deal with a lot of things in my life that had happened when I was younger. I was really like moving into a new stage of my life, and my personal practice was helping me a lot with it. And I was also working with these kids who had all been survivors of and witnesses to severe domestic abuse.
Mhm.
And I mean, in a way, I was just hanging out with them while their parents, their mothers really were in therapy.
Mhm.
And it was kind of the most natural thing in the world for me to start sharing these practices with them.
Mhm.
And it resonated so much. It built the relationship between us
Mhm.
in such a powerful way that it just really planted the seed. And then I came back to New York. I finished my master's, I started working as a teacher for Harlem Children's Zone.
Mhm.
And I was teaching kindergarteners. And, every minute that we weren't doing like what we really needed to do, we were doing yoga, we were practicing mindfulness, we were integrating movement into every aspect of our day together. And it took about a year for me to say, this is what I want to do. Like,
Yeah.
I'm pivoting. And like a year later in 2006, I started Little Flower Yoga, and I've been doing that full time ever since. So what I do primarily, and
Mhm.
we do a lot, but what we do is we work with schools. We kind of, we started very focused, really doing direct service work, teaching kids during the school day. Um, and that has expanded and grown and transformed into a program that really supports kids and families much more comprehensively. So
Okay.
we still do direct service work in schools, but we do a tremendous amount of professional development for classroom teachers, for school-based mental health care providers, for marriage and family therapists, social workers, psychotherapists, and we've also expanded our family engagement programming and created a lot of resources specifically for families.
Mhm.
Because of course, the more time you spend with kids, especially kids who are really struggling, the less you can separate the various parts of their life, right? So at every step of the way, once we start making progress in one domain, we immediately look to like, how can we improve this? How can we help this kid more? How can we expand services? You know, it's really, we try to, as much as possible in our small way, offer resources and support that kind of wrap the kid with adults who are connected enough to their own selves to be steady sources of support. And once we do that, we look at how we can share those resources and tools with the kids.
And
so
you're
that's
in New
kind
York
of
City
the background.
schools, right? You're still in New York City schools?
Yes. So we work with New York City schools. We work for the New York City Department of Education directly. We do large trainings directly for the DOE.
Yeah.
I think we worked with about 45 schools this year, doing direct service work. And we also have a children's yoga certification program. So people from any walk of life, parents, yoga teachers, clinicians can come and get certified to teach through our training program.
And then when did you feel the need to start an online program around anxiety?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's been a rising need, like the rising tide of anxiety in our culture. You know, my background is strongly working with kids who've experienced trauma. Yeah. And, you know, I work a lot through a lens that focuses on healing, empowerment, helping kids find a sense of agency in their life. And, you know, what I've been seeing over the last, you know, now 12, 14 years of doing this is that all of the things that used to be the things that I really like, the sort of the heavy hitting tools that I would pull out and lean on to work with kids who had experienced trauma were becoming more and more necessary for like the vast majority of kids. And I, you know, I don't want to jump to the conclusion of like, all our kids are traumatized. But we have seen, I think, undeniably over the last decade or so, decade and a half, a huge increase in childhood stressors, in childhood anxiety, in sort of a low level systemic trauma that our kids are experiencing as our culture is experiencing a trauma. And that combined with the technology use and what I see as a real problem of overstimulation and disconnection, which maybe we can talk about a little more, has created a situation where every year as we're working with our kids, we're seeing that if we don't really address this, we can't get anywhere else, right? We have to help our kids manage this anxiety that is coming from so many different parts of their life, but is magnified by the overstimulation and disconnection. And those tools that used to be so embedded in my trauma work have now kind of pulled through to much of my work around anxiety. And we just started this online course. This is something I've been teaching on live for a long time, but this is the first time we're running this particular online course exploring anxiety in children and adolescents. And it's just I'm happy to be doing it. I think it's something that people want and need and seem to be getting a lot out of. At the same time, I'm sort of sad that I'm relying on technology to talk about something while in the course itself, I'm talking about the disconnection that technology creates. Like, oh man, this is rough. I know. But I think we all just need to find, you know, new ways of meeting our needs in a changing world. And that's what we need to do for our kids. And much of my work with the kids around anxiety focuses on the idea of building a strong sense of personal power, and also recognizing when these sort of dual factors of overstimulation and disconnection are actually magnifying the stressors, magnifying the worries to a point where they don't feel manageable anymore. So I always talk to the kids about the idea that, you know, anxiety is not what's happening, right? The problem is not anxiety. Anxiety is our experience of whatever the challenging thing is. And if we feel like we don't have the inner resources to meet that challenge, it's so easy to become overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
And the work that we do together, of course, we look at things like, grounding and orienting and reducing input and managing rumination and intrusive thoughts. But all those things I kind of think of as like the triage, right? Like the sort of the moment by moment tools, whereas the longer, more important work, I think, and the work that has the trajectory to really make a difference long-term in a kid's life is the work of shoring up that kid's sense of personal power, of agency, of their identity as someone who's an active participant in their own life, right? Not just the receiver of stuff happening to them. And we explore this idea that we all have inner resources. We talk about those inner resources as the resources of our body, our breath, and our mindset. And then we also have the resource of community. And when we do anxiety work here with kids, we're looking at those 4 things, right? How can I access the resources of my body, my breath, my mindset, and how do I access the resource of community? Because we all exist in community, but that doesn't mean we know how to use that community as a resource, right? So we actively explore the idea with kids of what does it mean to ask for help? What does it mean to be a helper, right? And the ways that we can actually reduce our own anxiety by being the helper, because being the helper sends a really powerful message to our mind about our own competence. And so that's kind of the framework that I'm working in, and everything stems from there.
And just to be clear, friends who are listening who don't have children, this is for all humans.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this is what I love. This is what gets me. This is what I just laugh out loud about right now is like, I read the Yes Brain. And I'm like literally highlighting, circling things because I'm like, this what my adult client says, this what my adult client did, this where my woman's at. Like, I'm just like laughing out loud because I'm like, the Yes Brain is not for parents and educators. The Yes Brain is for humans.
It's all of it. It's all of it.
There's so much overlap. And so just women from Lola or from our community who are listening, accessing your body, your breath, your mindset, and your community in your own life. Like that is such a powerful tool because one of the things I've noticed is that, and this happens in our community and our online forum is someone will put like, I just really want to know. And I love, big hearts, everyone's trying to help. There's no judgment. It's just how we communicate about it is we're often like, ready with the pen and paper to take notes about helping someone else. Yeah. But we haven't done the work to integrate in our own life so that our own inner navigation system can help the human in need from a place of abundance because we have integrated.
Absolutely. And that just is magnified tenfold when you talk about kids because kids, anxiety travels in families, first of all. Our kids look to us to figure out what's scary and what's not, right? And they are so attuned to our nervous systems. They're so attuned to our emotional state. They get information about whether or not they should be freaked out from whether or not we're freaked out. So, it's such a huge piece for adults who are the leaders of children, whether that's in a family, in a school, in a clinical setting, in a community setting, as a coach, whatever it is, if we really want to help our kids, it's almost a cliche, right? But if we want to help our kids, we got to help ourselves. And it's not just because they need an example. It's because they take their clues about what's safe and what's not from our energetic and emotional state. So if we can't manage our own nervous system, then we're actually potentially inadvertently giving them false information that something is threatening or scary or dangerous when it's not. It's just kind of overwhelming us at the moment. And
do you know anything or how do you talk at all? I've not thought about this at all, but I'm just kind of processing this while listening to you. What about the subconscious? Okay, so basically what I'm going through in my mind is that I can hear what you're saying and I totally agree with you. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of the women in our community and my own child included. I have one kiddo who I'm learning more information about who's definitely suffering right now. And it's not conscious. Yeah. We're not talking about parents who are freaking out and trying to download that to their kiddo. Consciously, they are trying to make things better.
Mm-hmm.
Consciously, they are doing all the things. They're reading all the books. They're talking to the therapist. They're talking to their friends. So do you know anything about the subconscious transmission? I mean, is that the energy and emotional part that you think is happening?
Yeah. It's such a great question. And even as I'm listening to you ask the question, I'm like, oh, she's making a to-do list, right? Like you're reading the book, you're talking to the therapist, you're like, I think when we work so hard, honestly, I know it's like, I keep saying it, but it's the mantra, like when there's rising anxiety, whether it's in a kid or an adult, the first two things I'm always looking at is reduce stimulation, increase connection, right? And I have to remind myself that with my own kid and both of my kids really, although one struggles more with anxiety, but I want to address your question about the subconscious, but before I get there, it's really important for us to remember that if we're engaging with the anxiety of our child as a problem that we're trying to fix, there's a good chance that in the process, we're a little disconnected and a little overstimulated, right? Like we're looking for resources, we're watching videos, we're reading books, and then we're testing shit, right? That doesn't necessarily feel authentic to us. And then our kids are the recipients of this like sort of round robin experiment of different strategies instead of the recipient of like having fun with their mom or guardian or person, right? So for me, I always am like, I need to stop reading this book and play with my kid. And I know it's so simple. It's so like obvious that it's like almost silly to say it, but reducing stimulation and increasing connection for us, right? So the more we're trying to learn, and I'm not, look, I'm nerdy like that. I want to read all the books.
I know.
I want to watch all of it.
I know. I love it.
But it's also a distraction.
Right?
It's also a way of making myself feel better, like feel like I'm doing something about this when I'm not. I'm doing something that's easy for me to do. Right? It's easy for me to read a book. It's easy for me to lose myself in a course. It's easy for me to engage intellectually with what is an emotional human experience. And so for me, and also I don't want to send my kid the message that something that's a part of her needs to be gotten rid of, right? So often I talk with adults about this idea that when our kids experience anxiety, a lot of times our default is to have an attitude of like, well, the anxiety is the problem, we have to get rid of it, right? But anxiety is just an emotional experience like any other, right? It's an embodied emotional experience that has the potential to be functional, that can give us information, that can send us messages. I often say anxiety is your body's way of saying, hey, something important to you is at stake and you're nervous about your ability to handle it or to meet it. Right? When we think of anxiety as like, I got to get rid of this anxiety, it's the problem, we lose the ability to read our anxiety, to exist with it, to say, what is this anxiety trying to tell me? And sometimes that means we aren't giving something important to us its fair share of attention. Right? And I always think about like, can I shift that for myself with the other adults I work with, and ultimately for my kids? Can I shift that to more of an attitude like, anxiety's got something important to tell me. This is a message that something important to me is happening or is at stake here. And I need to figure it out, right? Maybe this anxiety needs me to gather more information. Maybe this anxiety is telling me to get my A game on, right? Maybe this anxiety is saying you need more preparation. You're not ready for this thing that's coming. Maybe anxiety is just a memory and it's coming to say like, you haven't really dealt with this thing from the past. You should give it some attention, look it in the face, figure out how to move forward from it, but also remind your nervous system that you're safe right now, right? Like anxiety could be asking us a lot of different things. And in asking us those things, it's giving us an offering, right? An opportunity to manage something or prepare for something or confront something or resolve something. But if we focus on trying to get rid of the anxiety, then we miss the opportunity to receive it and gather information from it. So
Yeah.
Adults, sorry, I didn't mean to,
No,
cut
that's
you off.
fine.
Like
Go ahead.
with adults, I try to say like, what's your mindset? Like, what's your mental narrative? You know, for me, I want my kid to experience it as something like, I see your anxiety. I know how hard it is for you. It may have something important to tell you. Let's figure it out together, right? I'm here with you, and I know you're strong enough to deal with this. But at the same time, you're not in it alone, right? I'm not going to leave you here to deal with it alone, but you are strong enough to deal with this, right? So, yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that it's like, you know, I picture my son when he's, I think it's, and I think knowing the human that you're working with also, because there's going to be more times when he's going to be able to hear that than when he's in a red state or a red zone or just totally freaking out and he can't hear and he can't absorb and he can't listen. It's not the time for me to sit down and say, okay, buddy, let's blah, blah. Like my little teacher voice, my kindergarten teacher voice kicks in.
I know the feeling.
I try to fix it. And now I've just learned to walk away because he settles that regulation eventually. And you know, what's really interesting too, is like, because I've been practicing this now that he's 7.5 for a few more years, like, you know, is that like now I can see that it's happening. I can feel the rise and I will tend to like either let him storm out or I'll just kind of slowly walk away. I don't like to like turn my back and walk away, but I just kind of move away. And then his reaction time is smaller, meaning when he then comes and crawls in my lap, where it used to be maybe half an hour between experience and like, because then he feels terror. He gets flooded with shame that it happened.
Yeah.
So there's
and
this
shame
opportunity.
Is such a sucker of personal power, right?
And it's all internal. This is not, he's not learning this. No. This is not stuff I'm saying to him. This is not, you know,
I know.
Anyway, it just, for some of these kids, it's just literally, I've seen this happen when he was 2, he'd stand in a corner. His inner critic is so loud.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So then this morning it happens about once a day. It used to happen about 500 times a day. So once a day, it's pretty much good. Better. Yeah. But he stormed out, and then it was literally not even 5 minutes later, he came down with like a Monopoly game and was like, want to play? So it's like connection, relationship, and it's like duct tape. Like I say nothing almost. And then once we're playing, I'm like, buddy, I just want you to know how much I love you. And I know you can handle, you know, I just try to sneak in little things once we're in that better space. Yeah.
But I also think everything you're saying is so true. And I want to make sure it's clear that I'm not saying you should say all these words to your kids about their anxiety. I mean, sometimes maybe some kids are ready. Yeah. It's more about your intention. Yeah. Right? Our intention, like what we're saying to ourselves, what's in our heart, because they get the messaging that we're giving to ourselves, whether we use the words or not. Right. So for me, it's not always about, like with my daughter, it's not like, your anxiety has something important to tell you. You're strong enough to handle it. Yeah. It's more me telling myself, your anxiety has something to tell her, right? This is not a crisis. This is information. And I remind myself she's strong enough to handle it so that my actions reflect. Yeah. Because if I'm not confident in her inner strength, then I'm sending her messages through my actions that I don't think she can handle this, right? If I'm jumping in there to fix everything and do everything and what's the problem and then I don't want to accidentally send her the message that I don't think she's strong enough to handle it, right? So it's my inner narrative. And every once in a while, bits and pieces of that get shared verbally, but it's more about how my actions and my emotions are conveying my own inner belief about her, right? That's going to send her the messages about who she is. And please, I don't pretend to have this like down pat, right? And I'm also constantly reminding myself, oh, check, got that box, parenting done for the day, right? No. But for me, one of the things I have to remind myself all the time as a parent is just because I'm engaging with her anxiety in a way that I truly believe is beneficial doesn't mean it's going to go away.
Totally.
Right? So it's like, I'm not measuring success based on how much anxiety she's experiencing, right? I'm measuring success based on the quality of our relationship, the strength of her character and her self-awareness during times that she's not consumed by anxiety, right? So like I'm looking at the long-term,
Yes.
the long-term
Yes.
goals here. And it's really easy for me to get kind of down on myself and think, with my daughter, with my students, think like, well, I'm doing everything right, but this anxiety just can't, anxiety is information and the world is really hard. And if I want to reduce her experience of anxiety, the best thing I can do is reduce stimulation and increase connection.
Yep.
Right? Everything beyond that is outside of my hands, except in as much as we work on building her sense of personal power.
Yeah.
Right? For the long haul.
Yeah.
And we explore simple strategies, body-based practices, breath work practices that can help her in the moment when I'm not around, especially, or when she doesn't feel like she has that really secure, grounded connection with an adult, right? So things that she can do with her friends or at school when, the environment is a little trickier for her to navigate. But for the most part, what I see as my greatest contribution to her learning to manage her anxiety is giving her the sort of the protection, the like parental protection of reducing stimulation even when she doesn't want it reduced, right? So her mind can handle whatever it is that's coming up, and increasing our relationship strength so that when she's ready to talk about it, she feels 100% safe to do so.
I've heard you say personal power a number of times. What does that mean and what does that look like for you and how you define it and work with your students?
Yeah. So for me, it's pretty specific, right? Is the idea of having personal power is the idea of knowing in your gut that you have the ability to impact your own life, right? So a lot of our kids are walking through the world basically assuming that, input comes in, they react to it, and that's their life, right? Their life is basically defined by the stuff that happens to them. Their mom's having a bad day, so they're having a bad day, right? Like that kind of thing. The input comes in, the action comes out, and my life is basically determined by the input. I think a lot of adults are walking around on that kind of default assumption too. And when I think about building a sense of personal power in kids, I'm thinking about a couple of things. One is, do they believe that they can have agency in their own life? Mm-hmm. That their actions, that their mindset, that what they do with their own body, breath, and mind can change their internal experience, even if the external circumstances don't change, right? So we do a lot of exploration around like compare and contrast, right? Doing different things with our body, different things with our breath, so that the kids can see for themselves, right, with their own experience, what it feels like to have a different felt sense of the same situation. Mm-hmm. Right? So we're not saying like you can make everything better with yoga and mindfulness or just change your mindset and you'll be happy, right? That's not the point. But the point is, having a sense of agency in your life means that you have an impact on your felt experience of the same environment, right? We can't always change the outside. What does it mean to use our resources to shift our own experience? We also, like I mentioned earlier, I do a lot of exploring around the idea of being a helper, whether it's in partner or group yoga or like doing something, just doing a favor for somebody, right? Because what I have found is that in our culture, there's a lot of like mindset intervention around anxiety, and it makes sense, right? But for kids, a mindset shift is the hardest, right? So like there's three parts of anxiety. There's what you feel, there's what you think, and there's what you do, right? So there's like what you feel in your body, there's what you think in your mind, and there's your actions, your behavior, which is really tied to your nervous system, right? And I think a lot of psychotherapy-based interventions, some of which I've benefited from, start with the mind, right? And it's a top-down intervention. But working with kids, what I've come to learn intimately is that those three things, there's no like direction of communication here, right? Those three things, the body, the mind, the nervous system, talk to each other in every direction, right? So if we want to change a mindset for a kid, often the best way to do it is by shifting their felt experience in their body, right? Or changing what they do, changing an action. Because when your body feels powerful, say you do something that's hard, right? Warrior poses, engaging your muscles, or power poses where you get big, right? And you engage, your body sends a message to your mind about your own competence, right? About your own capacity. Right? And that is a sort of a bottom up mindset intervention for a kid. When we help a kid find a way to act as an agent in someone else's life, right? To help another person, right? The power of being the helper is not just like, oh, I feel good about myself. It's also like, if I'm capable of helping someone else, that sends undeniable proof to my mind that I have capacity, right? That I have agency. So I often focus on the body and the actions first, the like what I feel and what I do. And then as kids start to explore that for themselves, they start to feel the difference for themselves, then we can get to the mindset intervention and be a little bit more specific around noticing what kind of thoughts we're having, actively working to manage and navigate intrusive thoughts, things like self-talk, right? Like all of that can work with kids, but in my experience, it works better when we start with the body and or the actions, right? So they have some concrete, like undeniable proof in their mind already. And sometimes self-talk can sound like a whole lot of bullshit, right? But if they have proven to their mind that they have some capacity, then these things like that, they take on a little bit more meaning. So it's a very long way of answering your question. But when I talk about personal power, is it like that undeniable gut feeling that I am an agent in my own life? Right? And when we stop feeling like we have agency in our own life, it's very easy to be pulled under by the world, right? Because there's a lot that's hard, and there's always going to be, right? There's just so much heartache and so much grief and so much fear that if we don't know in our gut that we can impact our own experience, it's almost impossible to see how we can have a meaningful life. Even when things are like kind of okay, much less for kids who are really experiencing serious trauma.
Totally. And also what I'm sort of like connecting the dots to is the noise that's in our lives and the disconnect to personal power, or I think what we call it in Lola is intuition in a lot of ways also. Yeah. And when you look through the lens that we all have basic goodness, and that our body really is a magical place and space for healing and wholeness and guidance, when we get quiet and listen, and from the embodiment standpoint, then more of that sort of tapping into natural intuition and guidance and magic and power can happen. Absolutely. So last week, Sailor just started a mindfulness club at school for the 5th grade because she just felt like they had no breaks during the day. They were going back to back to back to back to back. It was super funny because she wanted to write a letter to the principal to say, we really need a mindfulness club. I will lead it. My mom will just chaperone it, as an adult in the room. But I want a space for my friends to just sit and breathe in between classes in the middle of the day. And I told her she had to have research for her letter to the principal. So we called Lisa Flynn and got like quotes from Lisa. It was hilarious. It was like pulling together all the resources. I like held up Lisa's book, which I happen to have for something else. And I was like, you can talk to the author of this book. She's my friend. And she's like, oh, that's amazing. But going through the research and sort of proving, so we've got this mindfulness club. And last week was the first session. And they did a lot of talking and sharing. And then for the last few minutes, they did 3 minutes of breathing. And at the end of the 3 minutes of the breathing and just sitting in the dark kind of quietly, the kids, everything had dropped. And the kids were like, oh, I feel tired and I feel relaxed and I feel calm. And what I noticed was there was still so much chatter and talking in the beginning, the first half of the half an hour, that they were checking in, but the real shift in the nervous system was so visible after the 3 minutes of breathing. And Sailor and I talked about it after, I said, what did you notice? You know, like, did you see a difference between the breathing versus the talking exercises? And I'm not saying that talking is bad. I'm just saying when we take the time to have access to the body and relax and have silence. And I'm doing a bunch of podcast recording today. And the last one, the woman, she was like, hold on, put it on pause or edit it, because I have to go get my book. And I said, it's okay. We could just sit quietly. People can be bored for a minute. This is where we can practice. So it's these so micro movements.
Yeah. And I wonder, you know, with Sailor and that experience, and this is just an open question too, totally. Like, I wonder if they hadn't have had that half an hour or whatever it was of talking, would that 3 minutes of breath work have been as powerful?
Yeah.
Right. You know, because they also might have really needed to discharge, right?
Totally.
Connect with each other and do whatever it is that they accomplished through that interaction. They might have really needed that in order to feel safe enough in the space together to do this quieter practice. And so I completely agree with you. Yeah. And I also just want to keep everything in its sort of proper place, that, you know, there's so many different ways that we meet our own needs. And it's really frustrating for me sometimes to remember just how radically different all kids are, both in their experience and just the core of who they come out as. You know, I definitely am sort of an academic person who likes to say, like, this is what works.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's just not
good luck with that. Yeah.
Human. It's just not human, right? So I'm always like, okay, well, you know, if 10 things happened in this half an hour, right? It's possible that all 10 of those things had to happen for this like beautiful outcome. And, you know, I try to create some ease around the practices where I try to connect to my intention, you know, and if the idea is for the kids to build a greater sense of self-awareness and embodiment and a deeper capacity to relate to each other in community, I try to stay open to the reality that there are a lot of different ways that can happen.
Totally.
I happen to have expertise in some of them, but when the ones that I'm not as familiar with, or the ones that I'm not as in control of, sort of come into the space, I really try to like hang back and watch and say, as long as we're, you know, kind of moving in the direction of the intention, then I don't, who am I to say like how all these pieces are working together? And I also know that safety and community is such an essential part of doing any sort of healing work. That whatever gets us to that sense of safety with others is a really, really vital part of the process. It's really scary to tune into your own internal experience if you don't feel safe in the space and safe with the other people, right? Your nervous system wants to be, you know this, right? Your nervous system wants to be externally focused. That's where the threats are coming from, at least most of the time. So to do the work that we all really want for ourselves and our kids, this work of learning more about our own inner resources, accessing our own bodies, building self-awareness, understanding our own emotional and nervous system responses better. All of that means we have to turn the lens inward. And it's terrifying to do that if we don't know what's happening, if we don't feel confident about what's happening externally.
Yeah, such a good point. And thinking about that classroom setting, that specific example was, you know, when they did close their eyes for the 3 minutes, I sort of opened an eye to see if anyone was having shenanigans. And it wasn't. There was no shenanigans. It was all just like really deep. Eyes were closed. People felt really safe. And you're totally right, because if she had done the reverse, which she didn't, she intuitively, this was her whole jam. My role was to sit in the corner with my book and just be quiet and be an adult present. So I said nothing and I did nothing. I just sat there. But I could just feel the energy shift when they did that. But it's exactly right. The first half, Sailor said, this is a safe place. And how are you guys feeling right now? And people express that. And I've been in classrooms where there's not that created. And we start with breathing or eyes closed. And there's just so many eyes open and laughing and giggling and shenanigans because there's not that safety. So yes, you're exactly right, is that they're all sort of included, and they're all powerful. And I'm just noticing and watching the different dynamics because of this interest. And I also think, I guess I really do want to talk about the technology piece before we have to end for the day, because I know I have to get my kids and you get your kids.
They're going to have a lot of anxiety if we don't show up.
Totally. They'll be, where's my mom? So talk about tech. Do you think that's the main reason for this rise?
I think it's a piece of it. For two reasons. I think that the biggest problem with tech is the adult tech use. Kid tech use is like a whole conversation. I don't know what it's doing to their brains, but I do know beyond a shadow of a doubt that adult technology use, especially phone use, increases a sense of disconnection in kids, and increased sense of disconnection is a core driver of anxiety. And everything feels hard if you feel like you're in it alone. And if for a kid, if you feel like, you have to be fighting for attention, and there's something with those grownups that can always pull them away from you, it sets a really high bar. Like, kids have to be really freaking interesting and engaging for our minds not to, right? And it also sets up a situation where when we're distracted, adult distraction, whether it's with a phone or other things, means that we miss a lot of our kids' nonverbal clues, right? Mm-hmm. So kids are constantly giving us information about their well-being, about their needs, about their emotional state. They're constantly giving us information through their body language, through their actions, their eyes, the expressions and looks that they're giving us. And when we're distracted, especially when we're in technology, which is so consuming, we miss a lot of that nonverbal communication, right? We miss those bids for attention, the bids for affection, that our kids are kind of continuously giving us. And that's a big problem, because it means to get connection, they have to seek it out, right? And that sends a message to their nervous system, to their mind, about their own self-worth, about how deserving they are of connection, about what it means to connect with others, about how hard they have to work for it. And for our kids, like, connection, especially to the important grownups in their life, I think that's a core human right. It sounds dramatic, but it's such a defining part of how they develop their own sense of self, that when we put our kids in the situation of having to ask for connection, it sends them a message about how much they deserve it, and how reasonable it is to expect it. And I think that's a major problem. So I do see technology as a huge problem. I'm not entirely sure if the biggest part of the problem is the kid technology use. I do know, I think we all know, that technology use among kids contributes to overstimulation, right? So it's like this 1-2 punch, right? The adult technology use is decreasing connection, and the kids technology use is increasing stimulation, and the combination is particularly toxic. Right? When our kids are overstimulated, it means that their nervous system has to process so much input that it never gets a chance to relax into a sense of safety. Right? Because every time we're evaluating input, we're evaluating it for safety. And if the input is always coming in, right, then we never get to that baseline sense of safety in the body. And it's a problem. And then when we feel sort of alone in that, right, we have that stimulation, we get that sort of wired and tired by myself thing going on, where kids are physically tired, but they're totally overstimulated. They're vibrating at a pretty high frequency. We're so distracted that we don't notice the problem until it's either a total breakdown or a massive behavioral issue. And then it's really, I don't want to say it's too late, but it takes it from something where we could notice a subtle cue and intercede to stop a major problem before it happens, versus this space where now we have no idea what just happened. We don't really understand the trajectory of it because we were distracted. And now there's a high risk that we're meeting the situation with anger or frustration or overwhelm of our own, right? So we miss, it's sad because we miss a chance to connect, right? If we were less distracted, then this rising tide of overstimulation could be met with increased adult attention, right? That pulls the overstimulating experience into another kind of space, like a let's throw a ball around kind of space, right? That's connecting and soothing. But we miss that opportunity. We really do have an opportunity when our kids are struggling and suffering to replace their suffering with connection, but not if we're distracted.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And we're facing that. I mean, we're having some real conversations about this at home because we're really lucky that we have Learning Ally for Sailor's dyslexia, which reads her all of the books, and it's a real person reading the real book. So it's not that automated. That's really hard to follow. So I'm grateful. Because it's giving my kiddo access to material that is at her maturity level, because her reading level doesn't match her maturity level. So I'm super glad. Thanks. The Hate You Give is on there. So that made her world this year, that she could read that and then watch it. And she came to me last week and was like, I can't do my school reading on the computer before bed. I mean, she's up until 11:30. She cannot, her brain cannot relax. So we're in the middle. She said, how about, she came up with this so sweet. She was like, I'm going to set the alarm for 6:30 a.m. and I'm going to get up to do my reading so that I'm caught up, even though I'll be ahead of everybody for the day. Cause it's just really hard to manage the pace that they're going with her reading stuff. So I'm grateful for the technology, but it also was keeping her up. And she finally, and the thing is that I have to be honest, like I had seen that and mentioned it, and she shut that down as like you're a dumb mom, no way. But then something in her was feeling that exhaustion and not keeping up. And she said, I've got to find another way. And so again, like many things in our life, I'm grateful that we have this technology, and we have to work in real time with what's happening in this season with this human to make sure she gets sleep, because sleep is the most important. I said, sleep is way more important than you being on this chapter, you know?
Yeah, it really
But then it created anxiety that she was going to be behind for the reading group.
Yeah, of course.
Like, I don't want to be behind in the reading group with my peers who all read so damn fast.
Yeah, of course. And there's so many competing things, right? And there's so much, and I feel like I feel like really kids should go to school like maybe 3 days a week.
I just did an episode on homeschooling.
Right? They need less. They need less, but we're at a point where the world is demanding more and more. And like, I know like in sort of some fantasy land of best case scenario with that situation, like there could be an adult there who says like, I'm going to sit here and read with you. You don't have to be on this technology. But then we have work and all these other things.
Well, she doesn't. And because of the pull away that happens in these years, she's not interested in spending that much close time with me. And we were reading it together, and she's like, Mom, I just want to go in my room. Like, it's like very cathartic. Like she like cleans while she listens, but she wants that independence. She's like, I don't want you reading to me like I'm a baby, this particular school book. Like, so you're, again,
I know.
No answer. Just question.
But there's not, and then I try to remind myself it's not our job to have the answer.
Yeah.
Right? Like all we can do, all we're supposed to do is let them know that they're not in it alone.
Yeah.
Right. And that we think they're awesome and strong. And like, we try to get our insides to match what we know we want to tell them. Right. Yeah. So we have to believe it. And that way we're acting it. It's so easy to say and so much harder, of course, to do. But it is the constant reminder for me, whether it's with students, whether it's with my own kids, is like, what is my job? Right. It's not to fix it. It's not to make it perfect.
So hard.
It's actually stealing something from them if I do, because the world, they need to build that resilience.
Yeah.
Right? But I want them to know like the world is really hard, but I'm always going to be on their side.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I can make things easier, but like whenever I'm like, am I doing this right? I'm like, does my kid know that I'm on her side?
Yes.
Does she know that I believe in her? Does she know that I'm here for her? Does she know that I've got her back if she wants me there? And as long as that stuff is yes, I'm like, all right, it was a good day. Even if it was a hard day, like she learned something important that she needed to learn. And it might suck for me, it might suck for her, but you know, we're playing the long game.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that too, because at the end, that sort of being on the side, and lately, now that this has become like a habit, like since the beginning of the school year, she's had this,
Yeah.
is that now I'll kind of go in with my book and be like, can I just lay next to you while you listen to your book? And she's like, yes, you can do that. She's like, come on in. So she's like, let me back in, because I'm not reading to her. I'm reading my own book and she's listening to her book. And it's like, then we get that physical connection. So we're super snuggly again, but in our own zone. So yes, like that sort of that connection is the most important thing. Jen, thank you for everything you do, for all your writing, your yoga service council. I mean, you are out in the world helping person by person. I'll put the links to all your stuff in the show notes. Is there anything else coming up or you want people to make sure to know about or have access to?
No, I mean, I'm pretty easy to find. So if you have any questions, you know, it's just Jennifer at littlefloweryoga.com if you want to reach out. But I'm so glad that you're doing this series. I mean, it's almost impossible to find a family and a community that's not struggling with anxiety right now. And, you know, we've got to handle this. We've got to be the grown-ups. We've got to be the leaders, or, you know, things are just going to get harder and harder for our kids. So I'm really glad that you're doing this, and it's so good to see you. And
good to see you too. And hopefully in real life soon. Yeah. All right. Love you, girl.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.
Bye, Pleasance.